Chapter 5, Measures of Variability. The need for measures of variability. When met with two groups that have the same mean, the spread shows how big the range of data is. Data that is heterogeneous is more diverse. Homogeneous data tends to cluster more toward the mean. You'll notice here that on my heterogeneous data, the mean being the bullseye, there's still a lot that are close to it, but not quite as close as the few over here in the homogeneous that are all in the bullseye. The range is the distance between the biggest and the lowest scores, or the highest and the lowest scores in the distribution. Range is not useful in measure of variability. Standard deviation and variance. The distance between each score in a distribution and the mean of that distribution is called the deviation score. The mean of the deviation scores is called the standard deviation, abbreviated SD. The variance is the mean of the squared deviations around the mean. The denominator for samples is n-1 and n, number of scores for populations. The square root of the variance is a standard deviation marked by SD or S. The standard deviation of a population is a fixed number. The sample standard deviation, S, varies depending on the sample that was selected.
So the standard deviation for samples, I want you to notice that the variance here is S squared, and notice down here we have n-1. n-1 goes with samples. The biggest difference here for populations, when we get into populations, I change my letter here to sigma from S. S for sample, sigma, that's our Greek letter, and notice over here it is n. So for populations we've got n. The standard deviation, it's the same formula, only instead of using S, we're using Greek sigma. The difference here, I'm going to get n-1 for calculating formula for samples, and for populations, I'm going to use n.
In conducting research, researchers often use the variance and standard deviation from a single sample to estimate the variance and standard deviation of the population.
In this picture, I have my match that is lit, and my match that's lit is going to be my single sample that's going to estimate. By looking at these other matches, I can assume that since this is lit and each of these is being lit, that they will all be lit.
When a sample is larger, the choice of proper denominator, n versus n-1, to be used for the computation of the variance and standard deviation is not as important as when the sample is very small. So up here, with my smaller sample, that n-1 is much more important than down here, where n or n-1, either one would work. Standard deviation is often used to summarize data along with the mean or other measures of central tendency. Factors affecting variance and standard deviation. The wider the range, the higher the variance and standard deviation. The range is higher when the group is more heterogeneous regarding the characteristic being measured. The length of a test can affect the variance and standard deviation. Shorter tests tend to produce smaller variances than longer tests.